Hey everyone, welcome. So today we're going to talk about one of the most critical, absolutely foundational decisions any successful SaaS company has to make. And that's all about how you design your storage. Now, this isn't just some boring technical detail. No, this is a choice that's going to impact your cost, your performance, and your ability to scale from your very first customer to tens of thousands. You get this right, you're building a skyscraper. But if you get it wrong, well, you're building on sand. So let's dig in. Okay, let's set the scene. Imagine you've built this amazing project management tool. We'll call it Taskmaster. It's slick, it's fast, and people absolutely love it. You launch and bam, it just explodes. You're not getting just a few signups a day anymore. You're getting hundreds. This is the dream, right? This is what every founder wants. But with that incredible dream comes a very real, and let me tell you, a very urgent technical problem. So fast forward just a few months, and boom, you've onboarded 10,000 new customers. Think about that. That's 10,000 different companies, all with their own projects, their own files, their own users. The question that should be keeping your engineering team up at night isn't if you're going to hit a wall, but when. Seriously, where and how are you going to store all of this data and do it securely and efficiently? And that right there brings us to the heart of the SaaS scaling challenge, something called multi-tenancy. You got all these tenants, your customers, all living together inside your single application. The storage decision you make right now at this stage is it's fundamental. It really is like pouring the foundation for that skyscraper we mentioned. You really don't want to mess this up. When you strip away all the technical jargon, every single multi-tenant storage architecture boils down to one simple, really powerful question. Isolate or share? Do you isolate every customer's data into its own little box? Or do you just pull it all together in one big shared environment? That single choice, it's going to define everything that comes next. All right, so let's break down what these two philosophies actually mean in the real world. We're going to look at the two main models that pretty much everyone uses, and they come straight from that core question. We've got the silo model and we've got the pool model. And this is the perfect analogy to really get it. Think of the silo model like a neighborhood full of single-family homes, right? Each customer gets their own house, it's got its own walls, its own plumbing, its own security system. It's totally isolated and super secure. Now, the pooled model, that's like a giant apartment building. Everyone lives under the same roof, and you're all sharing the infrastructure, the lobby, the elevators, the plumbing. It's way, way cheaper, but you can imagine it's also a whole lot more complex to manage. Okay, let's make this concrete. Say you're using a cloud service like Amazon S3. In the silo model, you'd literally create a completely separate S3 bucket for every single customer. On the other hand, with the pool model, you just have one giant shared bucket, and then you just create a folder, or what we call a prefix, for each customer right inside it. See the difference? And this same logic applies perfectly to your database. With a silo model, you might give each customer their very own database, or maybe their own schema, which is kind of like a private set of tables just for them. But in the pool model, nope. Everybody's data, all the projects, all the tasks, it all gets dumped into the same massive tables. And the only way you know who owns what is by adding a special tenant_ID column to every single row. All right, one last example just to really drive this home. Let's say your Taskmaster app lets people export reports to a shared file system, something like Amazon EFS. Well, the pattern holds true. The silo approach, it gives each customer their own private folder at the very top level. The pool approach, you get a subfolder inside one big shared directory. It sounds so simple, right? But trust me, the implications are absolutely huge. Okay, so now we get the two philosophies, but the big question is, how do you actually choose? To do that, we have to look at the trade-offs, because there are always trade-offs. So let's bring up what I like to call the architect's scorecard. And this scorecard, wow, it just lays out the core dilemma perfectly. Look at the silo model. It gets top marks for performance and security. Of course it does. Everything's separate, so one customer's busy work can't slow down another, and it's way easier to prove you're compliant. But look at that money bag. It is expensive. The pool model is the complete opposite. It's way cheaper, big check mark there, but your performance can be all over the place, and man, managing security gets complicated. So here's the key takeaway. There is no single best answer here. This isn't just a tech decision. It's a business decision that's going to dictate your profit margins and maybe even whether you can land those big enterprise deals. So let's talk about that variable performance risk for a second. This is the famous noisy neighbor problem. Going back to our apartment analogy, this is the person who decides to throw a massive party at 3 a.m. right above you. In the SaaS world, it's that one customer who suddenly kicks off a huge data import or runs a monster report, and it just eats up all the shared database resources. And suddenly the app slows down to a crawl for everyone. This is without a doubt the single biggest fear of the pool model, and it can absolutely cause customers to leave. So, how do we solve this puzzle? Well, over time, engineers have come up with 3 proven, battle-tested patterns that put these ideas into practice. Let's walk through them. First up, we have a pattern I call the fortress. And just like the name says, this pattern is all about one thing and one thing only: maximum, no compromises, total isolation and security. The fortress is a pure 100% silo model. Every single customer gets their own S3 bucket, their own database schema, and get this, even their own unique encryption key. This gives you the strongest possible isolation you can get. And that's not just a tech feature, that's a sales feature. You pick this pattern when you absolutely have to meet strict compliance rules like HIPAA, or when you've got big finance customers who demand total data segregation before they'll even think about signing a deal. The catch? Of course there's a catch. It is by far the most expensive to run. Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we've got the cost saver. The name pretty much says it all. This pattern's main goal is to be as lean and mean and efficient as you can possibly be, which is super important in the early days. Yep, this is a pure pool model. Everybody shares one S3 bucket, one database, the whole shebang. All the magic for keeping data separate, it happens inside your application code, where you're checking that little tenant ID on every single database query. It's the cheapest and fastest way to get your product out the door, which makes it perfect for an early stage startup that's just focused on finding product market fit and, not running out of money. You have to be okay with the risk of those noisy neighbors.
Okay, but for most companies, let's be real, the fortress is probably way too expensive, and the cost saver is maybe a little too risky as you grow. And that brings us to the most common, the most pragmatic solution out there, the hybrid pattern.
The hybrid model is all about making smart compromises. You get to mix and match. So, for example, you might use a shared S3 bucket for all your files because, hey, it's cheap and it's easy, but you give each customer their own separate database to kill that noisy neighbor problem where it hurts the most. This approach, it gives you this fantastic balance of cost, performance, and isolation, and that is exactly why it's the go-to choice for most SaaS companies as they start to scale. So, we've got the fortress, the cost saver, and the hybrid. How in the world do you pick the right one for your application? It's a huge decision, I know, but we can break it down with a pretty simple framework. Just ask your team these 4 questions. Number 1, what's your compliance posture? If you're handling sensitive health data, the fortress might be your only real choice. Number 2, how critical is performance really? If you're selling to giant enterprise clients, they will not tolerate slowdowns, period. 3, what are your unit economics? You need to actually calculate the cost per customer for each model. And finally, number 4, be honest about your team's expertise. Managing a complex pooled environment safely, that takes some serious skill. So there you have it. The choice between isolating your data and sharing resources is this constant balancing act that every single SaaS company has to deal with. And I'll leave you with one final thought to chew on. As AI models and agents start to become their own kind of tenant inside our apps with these massive, unpredictable data needs, how are these storage strategies we've talked about today going to need to change and evolve? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.